If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
So the playoffs are around the corner, but there's still business left to be handled. This is EJ Stewart, joined by Tommy Beer. Orange and Blue Blood, new episode coming at you right now. Plenty to get to on this episode. We'll be talking about this Knicks-Pacers matchup happening on Wednesday. The Knicks, as of right now, as we enter Tuesday, still have something important to play for. So we'll talk about this game coming up against the Indiana Pacers. We'll also be talking about Jalen Brunson. And I told you guys that we would be talking about some of these other award cases. We mentioned Leon Rose for Executive of the Year. We'll probably get to Tibbs Coach of the Year conversation at some point in this last week of the season. We're going to focus on Jalen Brunson today and his most improved player candidacy. He actually was asked about it by Stephen Bondi of the Daily News, and he had some comments on that and didn't seem exactly excited about campaigning for the award. So I'll ask Tommy about that as well. And I know we're a Knicks podcast, but there is something happening with a non-Knicks NBA team that is extremely important in terms of what it will mean for the Knicks this offseason. We'll talk about that as well. So plenty to get to on this episode of Orange and Blue Bloods. Tommy Beer again joins me. How you feeling, Tommy?
Feeling good. Final week of the regular season. So many storylines abound. Western Conference completely up in the air. But we know that the Knicks are playoff bound. Now it's just a question of whether they lock in the 5 seed, fall back to 6. Outside chance they jump up to 4. Very outside chance. But either way, we'll have some playoff basketball in the spring. But before that, Knicks got to close out the regular season and have a chance to lock up that 5 seed as soon as Wednesday night against the Pacers.
That 5 seed is ultra important because it means that the Knicks likely would avoid a match with one of those top 3 teams, likely, of course, being the Philadelphia 76ers. So that's something that the Knicks have focused on a great deal of the last couple months of the season. Once the Nets kind of fell apart and we saw that Kevin Durant and Kyrie wouldn't be on the team, meaning that they would slide, the Knicks had their bullseye on that 5 seed. And right now, it's right there in their face. All they need is one Nets win or Knicks win on their own, one Nets loss or Knicks win on their own to get that. So we'll get right to it. So once again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, Odyssey, WFAN original. You can get these episodes of Orange and Blue Bloods wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Odyssey app. Make sure you hit the download feature on your streaming service so you can get these episodes every time we drop. We drop 3 times a week. So make sure you hit that auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN YouTube channel as well as the Odyssey Sports channel. So check us out as there to see the video version of these episodes, not just the full episode, but also segments of the episode posted. So make sure you check us out on the WFAN YouTube and the Odyssey Sports YouTube channel. But let's begin with this matchup with the Pacers. So the Knicks regular season is winding down. Only 3 games left to go. By the time they take the court Wednesday, they could have the number 5 seed locked up. The Knicks travel to Indiana to face the Pacers on Wednesday. The Knicks enter Tuesday as a number 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. As they enter Tuesday as number 5 seed, right now the magic number as we record is 1. The Nets, who are in 6th, play the T-Wolves Tuesday night, so that will be an important game. A Nets loss means the Knicks would have the 5 seed wrapped up, all clinched for good. If the Nets, of course, win, the Knicks could also clinch the 5 seed by beating Indiana on Wednesday. So let's talk about the Pacers real quick. Pacers are eliminated from playoff contention. That happened recently. They plummeted to a 34-45 record after a solid start to the season. They lost their last game to the Cavs, a win the Cavs got after losing to the Knicks on Friday. Cavs beat them 115-105. They were without Tyrese Halliburton, who's missed a lot of time during the second half of the season with various different injuries. He's missed 3 consecutive games with a sprained ankle and a sore elbow. Given that they are now out of playoff contention, you would think maybe he won't be out there. He was doubtful for that Cavs game and ended up not playing. We'll see what happens with this Knicks game. We also know the history, I guess, now we can talk about with Halliburton and the Knicks. So I don't know if that motivates him to get out there. But nonetheless, Halliburton has missed the last 3 games with not just 1 but 2 injuries. So we'll see how the Pacers handle that. The Knicks beat the Pacers in 2 earlier matchups this season, the last one being a 119-113 win on January 11th. So, Tommy, We know the Knicks can. I don't want to say backing because they played great, but we know the Knicks can get the 5 seed here. But do you think that it is important for them to take care of business against Indiana, regardless of whether or not the Nets win or lose?
I do actually. Well, I shouldn't say regardless of what the Knicks, assuming that I think it's important for the Knicks to lock up that 5 seed as soon as possible. So if that's Wednesday night via victory, that gives you an opportunity to rest Brunson the final 2 games. Or at least limit his minutes. Maybe sit him out 1 game and then have him play 15, 20 minutes the following night. We've seen some players you got to worry about rest because, as we know, Knicks play Wednesday, they play Friday, they play Sunday, Easter Sunday at 1 o'clock, the final game of the regular season. Then they'll have a week off. NBA playoffs begin that Saturday. Whether the Knicks play Saturday or Sunday, we won't know until the schedule is released. So some guys you worry about, you don't want to have 7 days off, 10 days off. I think Brunson's one of those guys where he's shown that he can come back from an extended absence and you basically shake off the rust immediately and get right back into the swing of things. You can again, we know the minutes played. It has been an issue all season. It'd be nice to get Grimes a little extra rest. It'd be nice to get IQ a little extra rest, and then you just reduce the possibility of a sprained ankle, a tweaked hamstring, a strained calf, a jammed finger, all the other little things that can happen at any corner, at any minute of any NBA game. So ideally, lock up the 5 seed. And then, you can kind of put the guys in bubble wrap and get ready for the postseason. So I do think it's relatively important. A couple of things to note. It was just that we're recording this, what is today, Tuesday afternoon?
Tuesday, yeah.
We're recording this Tuesday afternoon. It was just announced within a half hour or so. Looks like RJ Barrett will be cleared. He missed Sunday's game with a non-COVID illness. Sounds like he'll be back in the lineup Wednesday. So that's good news. You mentioned Tyrese Halliburton. The Pacers have not released their injury report as of this moment. Probably won't do so until tonight. In addition to Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner has missed the last few games. I would assume that the Pacers play without both of those guys the rest of the season. Knicks will be a big, heavy favorite Wednesday night in Indiana as well. They should be double-digit favorite. So it is a game that they should win. Again, take care of business and then lock up the 5 seed. The Knicks could still be playing for something even after they win, if they win Wednesday. Just a couple of the things to note. I think I mentioned this on the last pod. It's technically still possible for the Knicks to catch Cleveland. That would require the Knicks winning all 3 of their final games and the Cavs losing all 3 of their final games. Obviously, very unlikely. And the other thing just to note in that respect is the Cavs can also catch Philly if they win out and Philly loses one of their final 4. So we'll have a little bit better idea of that in the days ahead. But to directly answer your question, I think it's important to lock up the 5 seed as soon as possible, and then that gives you some opportunity, some leeway to kind of cruise into the postseason.
Yeah, I think to me, I think playing and make sure you're playing well, and if you can win this game, get in this game, I think it is important because almost that last part you mentioned with Cleveland, because that's the matchup that's most likely at this point.
Yep.
Cleveland is still playing with something to play for. I think it's interesting that the odds of them falling out of 4 is very unlikely. But they played, Donovan Mitchell a bunch of minutes against Indiana. They played Evan Mobley a bunch of minutes. Like, they're still playing these games because they know the 3 seed is out there. Yep. So when you juxtapose where the Knicks are, the Cavs have a matchup Tuesday night against the Magic. Of course, they win. That means they do clinch the 4 seed. I guess by then they'll know whether or not if they still have a shot at 3. But I kind of want the Knicks to continue to play up until when the Cavs decide, okay, we're going to rest our guys too. Like, what you don't want is the Knicks to come into that first playoff game rusty or maybe not 100% focused, not 100% the same mindset, while Cleveland, because they have been playing towards something, is a little more sharp, a little more in tune with what they want to do. So I'm looking at that. Like, maybe that won't matter if, the Cavs win this next game and the Sixers win, or if they lose next game and now they know, okay, we're not going to get the 3 and then they start resting guys. Maybe it won't be as big a deal. But I want the Knicks to be right up there with the Cavs in terms of their readiness for this postseason, because we know that there's a high likelihood that that's going to be the matchup.
Always an interesting conversation. You see it most often in football when
Yeah.
teams rest week 18. Or do they finish out the season strong? We know the Colts decided not to go for the undefeated season. We know that the Giants, the year they beat the Pats in the Super Bowl, played them really hard in week 17 as it was back then. And a lot of people said that was part of the reason they lost by, I think it was like 35-34, whatever it was one of the reasons that they were able to beat the Pats in the Super Bowl and the 18-0 Pats. So obviously, there's arguments that can be made on both sides of the ledger. I will say one thing that the Knicks want to do to close out the regular season, especially when playing their regulars, is play a little bit better defensively. They've been sloppy on the defensive end the last few games. They've tightened it up in the fourth quarter enough to get wins. Against Houston. Obviously, and of course, most recently this weekend. So there's that to keep in mind. There is I'd be interested to see, kind of Tibbs' take, and I guess we'll find out over the final couple of games, his feelings on the rest versus preparation angle. I
get a hint of where he will land with that. I don't know, knowing Tibbs. I have a little feeling of what he would think about that.
If I had to wager one side or the other, I think we can all agree that he'd probably rather them rest. But I will say that in the NBA, it's a little bit differently because even the Knicks play, their regular rotation, Brunson 39 minutes up until the regular season, they still have at least a week off before they play again. So it's not like, they'd sit guys out and then play 2 games from then, especially with that not having to deal with the play-in. But yeah, you're right. And also as far as the Cavs go, advancing to that 3 seed is huge. You can tell by they're playing their minutes. And because, not only do you avoid the Knicks in the first round and would play the Nets, which would be obviously, you ask teams, you give truth serum, they'd much rather play the Nets than the Knicks. You avoid the Bucks in the second round if you win. So certainly the Cavs have some motivation to finish out the season strong and at least play hard until they are officially eliminated from that 3 seed.
I think you make a good point also about the Knicks defense and some of the slippage we've seen on that end. And it's been inconsistent. There have been, like we saw in Cleveland first half. I actually thought they played hard defense. I thought Cleveland was just making every shot. And in the second half, we saw them, turn the lights out on Cleveland. We saw against Washington. First half, that was not a good defensive effort. That was not, they were not in tune. They were not good at all. And then we saw them second half turn the lights out on Washington. Like, it will be nice to see. I'm not saying a team is going to play 4 quarters of excellent defense, but it would be nice to see a more even performance defensively against this Pacers team. And it's important to note that this is a Pacers team that can score the ball. And that 51-point performance that Drew Holiday had against them a couple of nights ago, that was without Tyrese Halliburton in the lineup. The Pacers scored 136 points in that game against a Bucks team that's a very, very good, maybe one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, if not the best defensive team in the NBA. A couple games earlier before that with Halliburton in the lineup, they scored 130 in a loss to the Hawks. So we know Rick Carlisle, his team's going to take a lot of threes. They're going to move the ball. They're always going to play a disciplined brand of offensive basketball. So it is going to be important for the Knicks to be on their cues defensively.
And they just beat the Thunder, who are fighting for their lives to make the play-in, in the middle last week. So
and they beat them. They scored 121 in that game. So like this is a team that is obviously it's the only one they've had in the last 3-4 weeks, but it is a team that can score and it's a team that is live. And we've seen these matchups between these 2 teams this season. They've both been super competitive. The first game, of course, was the Wally Zerbiak game where he said Halliburton was an all-star, and that became a whole storyline for like a week. And then the last game at Madison Square Garden, the Knicks were in a close game, and they had to kind of pull that out late after Halliburton left the game mid-game with an ankle injury again in that game as well. Ankle injury, I think, has been bothering him pretty much all season. So this is I think that this is an important game. I don't want to over stress the importance, but you don't want to see the Knicks go out there against a team that is not nearly as good as them, obviously, and a team that is at this point in the 1-2-3 Cancun mode. Find a way to kind of dominate them or anything like that. You want to see Knicks continue to trend upward and at least play solid basketball. Hopefully get a W here. What when we talk about these postseason awards, I know we're going to talk about Jalen Brunson and his most improved player candidacy soon, but I think that there actually may be a conversation for all NBA as well between Brunson and Tyrese Halliburton. Now, Halliburton isn't playing this game, but Halliburton has been one of the top point guards in the NBA. He's been a 20 and 10 guy this season. I think he's one of the only guys averaging 20 points, 10 assists. When you compare Brunson and Halliburton for that all-NBA spot, probably looking at the third team, Where do you think Brunson stacks in that matchup? Do you think Halliburton has the edge? Halliburton did edge him for the All-Star game spot, which we saw and was highly talked about and very controversial at the time. What do we think about All-NBA?
I think Brunson deserves edge over Halliburton. I don't know if either of them get it. I think Brunson might be the last guy on the outside looking in. If we're just kind of looking at the four players, the players up for grabs for that final All NBA spot, or those final two, or those final four NBA second and third team. You got guys, De'Aaron Fox, Donovan Mitchell, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Dame Lillard. Those are the guards that are kind of, assuming that Luka and Steph are the first team All NBA guards. Then you kind of get into that second tier. And to me, a couple things. We'll talk about the Brunson for most improved player. I don't think he necessarily will get that. And I don't even know if I'd vote for him for that. But I think I would vote for him for the All NBA third team, because I think there's a little bit more emphasis on value on if we're talking about most valuable player characteristics, as opposed to most improved player, which I think is more of a statistical based award, at least in my interpretation of it.
Right.
So for a couple of reasons, I would have Brunson ahead of Halliburton. Halliburton's been awesome this year.
Yes.
Phenomenal. Just, right near the top of the league in terms of assists, incredibly efficient offensive player, good defensive player, can score, 24 points a night quite easily. There are two things about Halliburton that I think worth noting, especially in light of the new CBA with the 65 game minimum.
Yeah.
Halliburton's only appeared in 56 games this season. So you could argue that he deserved to make the All-Star team based on the first half production. Brunson has not only played far more games in the second half of the season and the season as a whole, he's been more effective, more productive, and has led his team, whereas the Pacers were one of the, earlier in the season, the first couple of times these two teams, the Pacers were ahead of the
yeah, exactly.
3 or 4, they were up there, and now obviously on the outside, the playing picture looking in. So whereas the Knicks have done anything, have only trended in the right direction, 13 games over 500, 5 seed in the playoffs. So I think for that reason, Brunson gets a nod over Halliburton. I don't know if he'll jump over, we'll see what Dame Lillard and that games played situation looks like. De'Aaron Fox, very strong case can be made. Donovan Mitchell, very strong case can be made. SGA, I think, is a lock for, if not the second.
He's got to be on that team. Yeah,
he's got to be on one of those teams. So that's kind of where I am. But in terms of head-to-head, Brunson or Halliburton, if I had to choose one for that third All-NBA third team, I'd go Brunson.
Yeah, I would too. And it's not knocking Halliburton. Halliburton's had a tremendous season. And in some ways, I think that the Pacers, even with their record right now, 34 and 45, that's still better than I thought they would be this season. So that is a testament to how he's able to lead that team. But I do value availability, and I do value, your team success. And I think that while we know the Knicks have a more talented roster, and I think a lot of people would have thought that before the season, the Knicks are a team that have well over exceeded expectations. Pacers are maybe slightly ahead of expectations. Halliburton's had a really great season. He's one of the best passers in the league. He's a high efficiency, a low volume scorer. The guy can average 20 points. It doesn't need to take a million shots. I mean, he's a really good player and also an impact player defensively. But I think for awards like All NBA, I really do think it does. That's why I really like that new rule coming in next season with the need to play at least 65 games. I really do think your availability has to matter. Like Steph, I assume will get first team, but I mean, he's only played 53 games this season. I mean, he's not technically eligible to even be up for the. He would never get it because he's not close enough, but he would not technically be eligible to be the leading scorer in the NBA this season. He's not played enough games to qualify for that. So if he makes All NBA, I'd be like, okay, I mean, he's actually not even eligible to be among the top leading scorers. Should he be eligible to be on the list for All NBA? I think right. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a Stephen Curry stan. I will defend Steph Curry to the end, but I'm just keeping it 100, So I do hope that Brunson gets a little more respect for the fact that he has played so many games and he's been so much of an impact on the Knicks and their winning this season.
And the Warriors are no guarantee to make the playoffs right now.
Right.
They could slip into the play-in. They have a couple bad games. They're out. They don't even advance the playoffs. How does that impact, the voting? Very interesting to see. Will the voters, even though they're not required to, obviously they can vote for a player, less than 65 games. The rules haven't been incorporated yet. Will they still, kind of act under those auspices of those now rules that will be implemented? So yeah, if you don't include Steph, then that obviously opens another guard spot. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out. So if you take Steph off, then I think the only two locks are Luka and SGA, and then you could have a battle royale. Same with Lillard. How many games has he played this season? Let me check.
Yeah. It's probably around the same number as Steph.
58 games, so he's not going to play again. So he'll finish with fewer than 60 games. And they have been terrible this season. He's been individually attacked. But how much weight do you put in? Again, that's where the argument that Tibbs was making for Brunson, and that's Knicks fans. If you were going to make an argument for Brunson, it would totally be, and they're not wrong, the fact that he's turned the franchise around. That is the point of delineation between the LOL Knicks and the Knicks, assuming they obviously have had a good season and continue trending in the right direction next season, etc. That will be looked at as the day that everything changed, was the day they signed Jalen Brunson. So I think you can make a strong argument that he deserves 13 All NBA.
Knicks Pacers Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It probably won't be a matchup between Halliburton and Brunson. If it is, I think that would be very fun to watch. These are two of the best point guards in the NBA. But I think it's a game that if the Nets are unable to take care of business, they do have another game Wednesday. They play back-to-back. They play in Detroit Wednesday. So that's a game you probably write down as a Nets win. So things get a little more dicey if somehow the Nets win on Tuesday, then go to Detroit and they win again and the Knicks lose. Yep. Now, you're in a situation where things get a little interesting. So definitely want to take care of business if you can here. So let's stay on Jalen Brunson. Let's keep the love for JB here. So Jalen Brunson says winning most improved player is not something he is focused on right now, though his name has been mentioned as among the top candidates for that award. Brunson is having one of the best, or not one of the best season of his career, definitely. His scoring totals have skyrocketed. A lot of his numbers have skyrocketed during his first season in New York. But speaking with the Daily News and Stephen Bondi, Brunson said it is not something he is worried about at this moment. He said, quote, "It's a unique award. It's not something I'm really focused on 100%. I don't really think about it. But if it's something that I win or achieve, I'll be very thankful, but it's not on the forefront of my mind." Tom Thibodeau was a lot more willing to campaign for Brunson when asked about it. He said, quote, "I think the one thing when you look at him, wherever he's been, whether it's high school, college, the pros, there's been significant jumps every season. And that's a testament to him and his willingness to grow and learn and work. His work ethic is off the charts. He'll get better every year. And so we were confident that he could do this. He's improved his scoring by 8 points a game. He's taking twice as many threes. He's shooting almost 42% from three. He's getting to the line. He's doubled his free throw attempts. There are significant things that he's done. But I would say the most important thing is what he's contributed to winning, and that's always been his biggest attribute." Tibbs taking a page out of the Tommy Beer page, their book there, with all the stats, had the stats lined up and ready to go on what Jalen Brunson has done this season. So other candidates for this award include Lauri Markkanen, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Mikal Bridges, who, since he's been a Brooklyn Net, has played at an all-star level. So first I'll ask you, if Jalen Brunson were to be most improved player, I know you kind of teased it earlier, you would not vote for Jalen Brunson at this moment in time?
It's close. Well, first and foremost, let me say Tibbs needs to watch film. Don't come at me with numbers. Only nerds care about numbers and stats and all that analytics garbage. Like I only go on the eye test and watching film a bunch of times. So
yeah, Tommy's saying, did he watch all the Jalen Brunson games two or three times before making his case for most improved player?
Exactly. And as he watched SGA and Lauri Markkanen, if not, his opinion's invalid. the most improved player award. The reason I think the thing working against Brunson is he was so good at this over the second half of last season.
Right.
Basically, since Luka went down, at the point Luka went down, December, I believe it was mid-December, all the way through January, had like a month where he was running the show, and he didn't average quite as lofty numbers as he did with the Knicks, but right around there. Luka came back, his numbers came down a little bit, but then he started ticking them up and up and up. Efficiency, production, points, plus minus were phenomenal last season. We know what happened in the postseasons, particularly that first playoff series against Utah. Basically showed this version of Jalen Brunson. So, to me, most improved is a guy coming, doing something we didn't expect. So for that reason, I probably lean towards Markkanen. I think you can make also, no disrespect to Lauri Markkanen, you can make a very strong case for him just in terms of his increase in not only production but efficiency, carrying the Jazz to the 35, 38, 500 mark. Nobody had them at around 500 coming into the season, so I think he deserves a ton of credit. Mikal Bridges, I think, is a guy that should get far more. There's 3 games left in the season, so we'll see what happens. But I think you can make a really strong case that Bridges, deserves really strong. In other words, if he had been traded in the offseason and finished the season with the Suns, got traded to the Nets, and then did what he's doing with Brooklyn for a full season, I think he'd almost be a lock for the award. 23 games he's played with Brooklyn, averaging 27.6 points, almost 5 boards, 63.5 true shooting percentage. He's second in the league in total points scored post All-Star break. He's just ahead of Devin Booker. Embiid is the only player that scored more total points since the All-Star break. As an aside, that trade's looking really good for the Nets right now. Not only did they get rid of Kyrie Irving, addition by subtraction, we know what's going on in Dallas. We don't even have to talk about that.
Well, we're about to the next segment. Yeah,
we will. But as far as what the Nets got back, not only did they get draft capital and kind of replenish their draft stock, but Bridges has been a monster. And just a really phenomenal player. So again, I just talked about why I think Brunson's deserving of the third team. I think, again, personally, these awards, so much subjectivity involved in the awards. What Brunson has done hasn't shocked me. I don't think it's quite as surprising. So it's not as quite a step up as what we've seen. Like, I did not see SGA averaging 32 points a game, over 50% shooting this year. Markkanen, again, from around 14 to what he's doing on the boards as well, defensively with the Jazz. Then you have Bridges. So I probably wouldn't. I'd have to sit down and obviously really think about it. If I was going to cast a vote, I do not have a vote, but I don't think I would lean in one of those other 3 guys' directions, I think.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think for me, the leaders in the clubhouse, I'll tell you what, I think Bridges' case is extremely compelling because it almost kind of presents a new definition of the award that we really kind of never have done. Usually it's been most improved from last season. But in this case, you almost have to say like most improved within a season. And to some degree, like when you think about most improved awards, like outside of maybe the NBA, when you think of like youth sports or you think about, jobs, things like that, usually most improved award is for someone that improved over the course of a season, not necessarily from last season or last year to this year. So the fact that you had a guy who was averaging 17 points for one team, go to another team and average almost 28 points a game. He has 2 games with the Nets where he's scored over 40 points. Like you would think that, okay, he's improved over the course of the season, so maybe he's the guy that should get the award. So I think I would lean Bridges over Brunson. And to me, this may actually be one of the best crop of most improved player candidates I've seen them. Like you're talking about, 2 guys who were all-stars in Shai Gilgeous and Lauri Markkanen, 1 guy that should have been an all-star in Jalen Brunson, and another guy, Mikal Bridges, who's been playing like a top 10 player the last month and a half of the season. So these are all really great candidates to me. I just think with what we saw from Brunson last season, as you mentioned, and kind of what we were kind of expecting coming into the season. Not to say that we thought the Knicks would maybe take the leap that the Knicks had taken, but I think a lot of people thought that Brunson could take an individual leap that he has taken because he'd have more minutes, more shots, more opportunities to kind of run a team. So I think if you told me before the season these were going to be his numbers, I would have been like, oh, wow, that's great. And maybe I'd be pleasantly surprised. Maybe after the points are a little high, but I'd say, oh, wow, that's really good. But I would not have been shocked. Right. You would have told me that Lauri Markkanen, a guy who I've been a big fan of coming out of Arizona and early in his career, and I've been very disappointed in him. He was a player for like 3 seasons. I kept saying, oh, this guy's going to he's going to make his first All-Star game this year. And he kept disappointing. And to go from being, a kind of a role player, bit player in Cleveland, averaging 14 points a game to what he's been for the Utah Jazz, that to me is stunning. I did not see that coming. I love Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I may have been a guy who thought he could average 30 because I love him so much. But I know a lot of people did not expect what they saw from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander this year. And I knew Bridges would get more shots and more opportunities, but I didn't think he'd be this good for Brooklyn. So I think that those guys would probably still be the leaders in the clubhouse. But Jalen Brunson doesn't take away from the fact that he still had an awesome season this year for the Knicks.
I totally agree. And the other thing with Markkanen, if I would have told you on April 4th that the Jazz would be a half game behind the Mavs, just 2 games back of the Timberwolves, that a lot of that has to do with Markkanen. Interestingly, as an aside, since we mentioned it, it was a good story at the beginning of the season, and it was a good story for most of the season. Now, if you're a Jazz fan, you're in no man's land. That's why I was surprised by kind of the direction Ainge took. Could they improve next year and jump up another 5-10 wins? I guess, they can build around the edges, but I think a lot of Jazz fans were hoping that they clear house, get rid of Gobert, get rid of Royce O'Neal, get rid of Donovan Mitchell, of course, and then be in the Wembanyama sweepstakes. They're nowhere near. I'm sure they could get lucky in the lottery, but to walk away from this season with the 9th overall pick in the draft, let's say, is not what we expected. So that's good in one case when you're making the case for Lauri Markkanen. In terms of the Jazz future franchise, yes, they have a ton of draft capital, so they could trade for another player. They have a lot of ways to go, but they don't have it. They most likely won't have a top pick in this year's draft, which is interesting. I'll just say.
Yeah, to quote Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec, never half-ass one thing, or 2 things, whole-ass one thing. So they kind of did a half job. They were like, okay, we're going to strip it down, but we're not going to trade the rest of these veterans until it's too late. So, like, they traded, Mitch, Donovan Mitchell. They traded Gobert. They traded Royce O'Neal. And then they had all these other guys that were still viable players for them that would say, all right, what are you going to do with Conley? What are you going to do with the guy they got, Jordan Clarkson? Like, what are you going to do with some of these players? And a lot of these guys, they kept some of them. They still have on the team that they've still not gotten rid of. Yep. And because of that, the Jazz, and because of Markkanen's improved play this season, they never were able to really get themselves into the Wembanyama Sweet 6 because they were too good. And instead of not letting that thing ride out once they started off hot, he let it go up until the trade deadline, when then it started to appear, okay, I don't know if the playoffs are likely at this point. At that point, it was too late. So it was
Beasley, Vanderbilt, all those guys helped him too much.
And he also overvalued those guys. I mean, remember, he wanted a first-round pick for each of these players, and he only ended up getting 1 first-round pick for 3 of the guys he traded. He traded Conley, traded Vanderbilt, traded Beasley, and he's all these guys were worth the first and only got 1. So, like, and meanwhile, how many games of those guys win for the Jazz over the course of that time? So, in my opinion, it was a borderline disaster class from Danny Ainge in terms of team building and putting themselves in a position to really build. Because now you come into this draft, now, you got 1 million picks from the Timberwolves, so I'm sure they'll be fine for the next few years. But you come into this draft now, and a draft that has some really impressive talent, but I think it's top heavy, if you ask me. Someone who follows the draft. I think that once you get out of the top 4, I think you're starting to kind of throw darts at the dartboard, and it gets a little scary. And the Jazz, who are a team that clearly need a lot of help, they could be looking at another season next season where now they have to strip down more veterans to try to rebuild this roster. So meanwhile, you got Lauri Markkanen, an all-star player on your team. Like, how many games are you going to lose with that guy playing at the level he's playing? So yeah, Jazz not in the best situation at this point. Maybe the Knicks getting the last laugh after all of that Donovan Mitchell trade fiasco and all the negotiations that happened with that. But we'll see what happens with the Most Improved Player award. I do think that it's a very impressive class. Brunson will be among the guys named. I don't know if he'll be a finalist, but I think he will be among the top 4 or 5 guys in the voting there. Let's wrap the show talking about, again, a team that is not the Knicks, but is definitely impacting the Knicks right now in terms of what their offseason will look like. And that is the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks have been an absolute tailspin, and their struggles could impact the Knicks in a negative way. So let's explain this. The Mavs lost in OT to Atlanta on Sunday. They have fallen to
a wild game.
Wild game. Which, surprise. By the way, Tom, before I even get into this, I had to mention, did you see the John Hollinger tweet on the Hawks season and the numbers and just
Amazing.
How mid they are this season? I mean, they basically, for the entire season, in terms of the overall numbers, in terms of points allowed and points scored, they're essentially even for the entire season.
Yep.
They are 39-39 with a record.
Yep.
They are 39-39 with their record, so they're 500. They've scored 9,209 points. They've allowed 9,210 points. So that's literally a 1-point difference over the course of 78 games this season. They are 24-24 against the East, 15-15 against the West, and they are within 1 game of 500 for a 72 consecutive days. So all the talk about, the mid-3 with the Knicks, I mean, there's nothing more mid than what you're seeing from the Atlanta Hawks. That is a stunning stat, and shout out to John Hollinger for having that ready to go after this win they had, because I had to read this like 5 times when I saw that. Unbelievable what's happened with the Hawks.
It's like the that Duke North Carolina stats for over like 25 years, where they were like within 1 point of each other.
Yeah.
And also for somebody that's the king of Broadway, that's not very regal to be mid,
No, not at all. Yeah, it's definitely not good for the king of Broadway. Not good for the brand at all. They may have to, it makes heads are gonna have to roll, and there may be some guillotines out for what's going on with the Hawks if the king is looking so embarrassing in this light with being so mid right now this season. But back on the Mavericks, the Hawks got back to 500 with this win over the Mavericks. So the Mavs now in the 11th seed, and more importantly, the Mavs are the 10th worst team in the NBA. What that means is the top 10 protected pick that the Mavs own the Knicks from the Kristaps Porzingis trade would not convey for the Knicks if Dallas remains in the top 10 once we get to the draft lottery. The Dallas Mavericks will keep their pick. Now, they are currently 1 game behind OKC for the final play-in spot in the West. Dallas' next game is against the Sacramento Kings on Wednesday. So there's been talk about should the Dallas Mavericks lose these 3 games so they ensure that they can get that top 10 pick, because the odds, if they fall to 11, like drastically change whether or not they can keep their pick. Because essentially, if they fall to 11 or 12 or any of these numbers, they eventually have to have like an 80% chance of not getting their pick. But if they stay in the top 10, or even they stay at 10, they basically have a 90% chance of keeping their pick. But this is also the Dallas Mavericks, a team with a lot of expectations, a team that wanted to make the playoffs, a team that just traded for Kyrie Irving. So you would think that also would be a motivation for them. So before we get even on the Knicks standpoint, like, what would you do right now if you're Dallas?
Okay, so a couple things. They play the Kings Wednesday night. Kings are basically locked into the 3 seed. It looks like they can catch Memphis. If they win out, the Grizz lose out. Phoenix is not going to catch them. So I think for all intents and purposes, they're locked into the 3 seed. So we'll see if they play their stars. I assume there's still a full week left in the regular season. So I wouldn't think they'd sit everybody out, but maybe they'll stagger. De'Aaron Fox sits out Monday. Sabonis sits out Thursday. That type of thing. Maybe they'll do that. We'll see how that plays itself out. After that, the Mavs play the Bulls Friday night. That could end up being not the most important game of the next season, but up there. The Bulls currently are 38-40. The Mavs are 37-42. So if the Mavs win Wednesday, they'd be 38-42, and the Bulls lose. Those 2 teams could essentially decide whether the because OKC is also at 38-41, and Minnesota's at 39-40. So there's a lot of flip flopping, but that could essentially decide whether the Bulls are 10 and the Mavs are 11, or the Mavs are 11 and the Bulls are 10. Yes. So to your point, there was also a Shams report, Shams Charania of The Athletic, on a podcast, or I saw a clip on Twitter. So I think it was a live stream, basically saying that the Mavs have had internal discussions whether to sit Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving the final 3 games, which would be shocking in the sense that they obviously are just a game behind the Thunder, but the Thunder on the tie break, so they need to win out and then have the Thunder lose at least 1 game, because they have to pass OKC in the standings. So, maybe if the Dallas, maybe they'll play their guys Wednesday night. If they're mathematically eliminated by Friday night, they sit their 2 guys out, in particular for that Bulls game. And yes, so the Knicks, just to clarify on the Knicks point, the pick from the Porzingis trade is top 10 protected. So if the Knicks don't get it this year, it's still top 10 protected next year, and then top 10 protected the next year after that. Then it transfers to a 2nd round pick. So it's not like the Knicks would, you assume with Luka Doncic they would at least be not one of the 10 worst teams in the NBA last season. But we said that coming into the season, and they traded for a Hall of Famer in his prime, and look where they are. But from the Mavs perspective, you could certainly understand why they would have faith that they'd be in one of the 10 best teams in the NBA, then transfer, the 23rd overall pick next season and keep the 10th pick this year. The reason why the Knicks could still get the pick if the Mavs finish the regular season with the 10th worst record, as EJ talked about, is a team in the 11, 12, 13, 14 could jump up into the top 4. Again, very slim odds. I think it's less than 2% for each of those teams. So again, it's like 93% that the Mavs would keep their pick. The irony of all ironies, of course, would be if they sit Luka and Kyrie and then finish with the 10th worst record, and then a team jumps them in the lottery, then they still transfer the pick. So craziness could be abound. Do I think the Mavs should tank the final 3 games? I don't think they can. I think you send the wrong message to Luka, to the organization, to your fans. Listen, if by Friday night they're mathematically eliminated, then all bets are off. Then you want to lose the Bulls game on purpose, so be it. But I don't think you can go into Wednesday night still with a chance to qualify for the postseason, however slim that chance is, and have a team with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving and lose the game and then sit those guys. I personally, I know the league would have a problem with it. It'd be a major talking point. I just think it would send the wrong message to everybody involved.
Yeah, I assume once that Shams report came out that the NBA, I assume they called the Dallas Mavericks. I think that would have to have been a very serious conversation, because the whole point of the play-in tournament was to drive interest in the final games of the season, was to keep these teams who are kind of in a situation where maybe they would say, all right, we can just mail it and say, hey, well, we can still make the playoffs even though we're the 10th seed. So why not just, play it out, since we're not going to have a chance at a top pick anyway. But this became such a unique situation I don't think the NBA could have ever really thought about, that a team could have a top 10 pick that is also a team that thought they were title contenders, but is in a position where maybe if they lose, it'll be better for them to keep that pick as opposed to trying to get into a playing situation that they don't control their own destiny. Like, they can win all these 3 games and still not make the playoffs. So that is not something the league could have thought about, which is why we're now having this very interesting conversation when it comes to the Dallas Mavericks. And just to put these odds, in context, like right now, the Oklahoma City Thunder are the 11th team in this thing. So if Dallas were to fall to 11, they would be in this spot. Right now, Oklahoma City has a 9.4% chance of getting into the top 4. If Dallas were to fall in that spot, that would be their chances of keeping their lottery pick. Because if they don't get into the top 4, you can't move up to 7 or you can't move up to 8. It doesn't work like that. If you're outside of the top 4, you can only get to the top 4. That's as high as you can't get into 6 or 7 or anything like that. All you can do is fall back. They can fall back, but that's
the NBA format is they just draw. The NBA format is they just draw, for those that may not be sure. They just draw. They have the lottery hopper, and it's actually 4 numbers, not 1 number. But they draw for the first 4 seeds. After the first 4 seeds are drawn, then it's strictly record order after that.
Yes, exactly. So it this is very interesting when it comes to like what Dallas will do. I anticipate that they'll play until they realize that they're not going to make the playoffs. I don't think that they'll sit their guys early, because I think that it would send a really bad message for the entire league and for a league that is trying to build goodwill about the fact that its regular season does matter when people are upset about it.
I will say this. One, the Mavs could finish with the 11th most record in the league and still the Knicks not get their pick, because they could jump up into the top.
Exactly.
One other thing to keep in mind. I just, as far as the league and Silver getting the phone and, with the Mavs, the one thing, if anybody was going to tweak the NBA and just give an FU to the league, it's Cuban, who's already protesting a game. He's furious with the referees. I've actually had a conversation with him via Twitter direct message. He reached out to me actually and let me know that I tweeted that the NBA is moving in the right direction. The referees are doing some, they're preparing, more diligently. There's more film review. He went on a tangent, and AJ, I'll show you the DMs.
You gotta show me that guy. Screenshot that one for me.
I will do, but he just basically explained that I couldn't be further from the truth, and he has proprietary information that I certainly don't have access to. So let's just say there's bad blood between the league and the Mavs.
And don't forget, remember they protested the Jalen Brunson, or at least they wanted the tampering charges on Jalen Brunson. That I guess they won. It was like a late first round pick. The Knicks lost from like 4 or 5 years from now, but nonetheless, it's been a frustrating year for Mark Cuban all around. His team hasn't played well. The coach hasn't performed all that well, and Jason Kidd. So, if there's anybody who would definitely want to tweak the NBA, I agree. It is Mark Cuban. For the Knicks, if they aren't unable to get this pick this season, like how much you think it would impact like how they approach this offseason, because they wouldn't have a first round pick. They traded that for Josh Hart. So it does become a little interesting in regards to how flexible they could be with making a big trade this summer, or maybe even during the draft season when that comes around.
Exactly. The important piece here is not only obviously would they not have a 11th overall pick, 12th overall pick, which they could use and add the rotation or flip the guy or whatever the case might be, they wouldn't be able, because of the stipend rule, they wouldn't be able to make a trade for involving future draft picks until their draft pick was made. So later in the draft or after the day after the draft, et cetera, during free agency, they could still make the pick, because then they would have their own 2024 pick. But they would not have a 2023 pick. So that would kind of complicate things. So yes, make no mistake, the Knicks are hoping for multiple reasons, especially if a superstar shakes loose and you need extra draft capital, that the pick conveys this season. Because again, obviously, common sense would tell you that the Mavs would be much better next season, whether they get rid of Kyrie or not.
Exactly.
They're very unlikely to be on the borderline. Most people didn't assume that the 10th wouldn't even come into play, because that the Mavs would make the playoffs, or at least at the worst case scenario, if they were going to miss the playoffs, be the 14th, 13th seed, and here they are potentially 9, 10. So we'll see.
Yeah, and with the Knicks having to make decisions about who to pay this offseason, does Obi Toppin get traded? Like, there's also the idea the Knicks may want to have just drafted a guy to maybe replace somebody in this rotation. Like, there's a chance that I don't think there's any chance, obviously, that IQ anybody leaves. But if there's some movement in this roster, that's a pick they could have had. If you have a 11th, 12th pick in the draft, or whatever you're standing at, like, you have a chance to get a player who is in the rotation next season, a guy who can contribute, or a guy who maybe has a pretty high ceiling. So they would have liked to have had that pick, whether it was to move it or whether to keep it. So it will be interesting to see what the Dallas Mavericks do, but a fascinating situation happening with Dallas, and it directly involves the Knicks and whether or not they will get this top 10 protected draft pick this season. But that's going to do it for this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. Thank you guys so much for checking us out. Tommy, let the people know they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram. Again, thank you guys for checking out Orange and Blue Bloods, a WFAN Odyssey original New York Knicks podcast. You can get these episodes wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Odyssey app. Hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. We drop 3 times a week. We have one more coming at you later this week, so make sure you keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Also, check us out on YouTube. We're on the Odyssey Sports page and the WFAN YouTube channel as well. So check us out there. We post the full episode and segments from these episodes on YouTube. Check us out, WFAN Odyssey Sports. Thank you guys again for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.